Headlines this week: a man who buried a 7-year-old alive is sentenced, a man released by Trump is set to be the Taliban's head of state, the Capitol riots Viking is sentenced, and Oklahoma locks down all its prisons due to widespread attacks. Before we get started, if you missed last week's episode, the link is in the top right corner now. If at any point you receive value from our content, please help us out by pressing subscribe, commenting, and leaving a like. A Wisconsin teenager has been sentenced to 20 years in prison for the death of a 7-year-old relative forced to carry a 44-pound log and buried in the snow after failing to recite Bible verses before he died. Damien Hausschultz, 17, of Michigan, pleaded guilty in June to first-degree reckless homicide in the 2018 death of Ethan Hausschultz. During the homicide hearing, the court heard that Damien's father, Timothy Hausschultz, had ordered Damien, then 14, to punish Ethan for not knowing 13 Bible verses. The father faces trial in December and has 8 charges, including felony murder and felony contributing to the delinquency of a child. His wife, Tina McKeever Hausschultz, is already serving 5 years for failing to prevent bodily harm and intentionally contributing to the delinquency of a child. On Thursday, Manitowoc County Circuit Court Judge Geraldine Dietz sentenced Damien to 20 years behind bars. After serving his prison time, he will be on extended supervision for another 10 years. In addition to his jail term, Damien was also ordered to write a letter to Ethan's mother, Andrea Everett, after he had been in prison for 5 years, telling her what he'd learned. "My goal is to ensure that you are incarcerated for long enough to mature and develop, to work on education, to work on treatment, work on controlling that angry side," Dietz said. "I strongly believe that well into your 30s is necessary for you to have the development, the maturity, and the time needed to ensure that you are no longer a threat to the community." The CIA captured him and Trump let him out. Now he's set to lead Afghanistan. Abdul Ghani Baradar was captured by the CIA and spent years in prison before being freed by the Trump administration. He's likely to be the Taliban's new head of government. Although an expected announcement of the new Taliban-led government of Afghanistan failed to materialize after Friday's religious prayers, the group is widely expected to name a theocratic slate of Islamic judges to key positions, with the political leadership role expected to go to a former prisoner of the CIA, who later personally negotiated the US departure with the Trump administration. Abdul Ghani Baradar, whose age is unknown, remains poised to be named the political head of state, a role comparable to head of government, leading a mix of Taliban factions including political powers such as the Haqqani Network and groups from the southern provinces of Helmand and Kandahar, considered the heartland of the mostly ethnic Pashtun Taliban. Once a close friend of the Taliban's first leader, Mohammed Omar, Baradar spent years leading Taliban forces and managing its shadow governments in multiple provinces before being captured in a 2010 CIA operation in Pakistan. He was imprisoned until 2018 when he was released at the request of the Trump administration. After his release, he went to join a Taliban negotiating team in Doha, Qatar. He played a high-profile role in working out a deal for American troops to leave in exchange for an end to attacks on US troops. By last year, his perceived value to the talks by American diplomats and the Trump administration led to a photo op between Baradar and then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. During the talks, which led to an agreement in 2020 with Trump that was implemented this summer by the Biden administration, a Washington Post profile quoted Baradar as expressing hope for a reasonable political accommodation with the rest of Afghanistan. He adopted the language of reconciliation, said the Washington Post, saying the Taliban was seeking an Islamic system in which all people of the nation can participate without discrimination and live harmoniously with each other in an atmosphere of brotherhood. But Baradar's expected role as a head of state will not be conventional. As already announced by the Taliban leadership, it plans to rule according to its unusually austere interpretation of Islamic law, Sharia law, expecting a similar system to Iran, where politics and administration is generally overseen by a supreme religious authority who approves government policy at the highest levels. Experts have tipped Hayatollah Khamenei, the group's top religious authority, as likely to play a similar role in the new government. a prominent supporter of the baseless conspiracy theory canon, has accepted a plea deal in federal court for his involvement in the US Capitol riots. Jacob Anthony Chansley was one of the thousands of Trump supporters who attempted to prevent the US Congress from certifying the 2020 election. Chansley pleaded guilty on Friday to one felony account of obstruction in an official proceeding. Nearly 600 people have been charged in the federal investigation of the riot. At least 36 defendants have to date pleaded guilty, 8 of whom have pleaded guilty to felonies, according to CBS News. Chansley became the de facto face of the siege, pictured amid the unrest in horns and a bearskin headdress with the American flag painted on his face. He called himself the Canon Shaman. Canon is a wide-ranging conspiracy theory whose followers believe former President Donald Trump was waging a secret war against elite Satan-worshipping paedophiles in government, business and the media. Chansley told the FBI he came to DC at the request of the president that all patriots come to the DC. He has been in custody for 8 months. His attorney Albert Watkins told the court on Friday his client was non-violent, peaceful and possessed of genuine mental health issues. Chansley, who has made several requests for his release, now claims to disavow both Canon and Mr. Trump. He is due to be sentenced in November and could face up to 51 months in prison. Supporters of the Capitol riot defendants are reportedly planning a large demonstration in DC later this month. Oklahoma prisons locked down after inmate attacks at 6 sites. The head of Oklahoma's prison system ordered a statewide lockdown Friday after several inmates were injured in what authorities say were gang-related attacks. Corrections Director Scott Crow ordered the lockdown and cancelled all visitation through the weekend. "We continue to monitor the situation and will maintain the lockdown as long as necessary for safety," Crow said in a statement. Several inmates were injured seriously, but none of the injuries were life-threatening, the agency said. The prisons where the attacks occurred were the Jim E. Hamilton Correctional Center in Ogden, MacAlford Correctional Center in Atoka, John H. Lilly Correctional Center near Boley, Lexington Assessment and Reception Center, Dick Connor Correctional Center in Hominy, and Davis Correctional Facility in Holdenville. The DOC spokesman, Justin Wolf, said he couldn't detail how many inmates were injured or the nature of the attacks because the incidents were still under investigation. That's all for this week. If you enjoyed the week's episode, please subscribe and leave us a like. If you missed last week's episode, it's on the screen now. Until next week.